Cool. So welcome everyone to the Diverse Podcast. I'm Toby and you're listening to the latest episode where I'm speaking with John, and I'll let John explain exactly what he does. But on the podcast, we talk to successful young professionals, entrepreneurs and employers to give you their top tips on how you can be successful in your given field as well. So John, thanks so much for joining. Welcome. How you doing?
Thank you very much, Toby. Pleasure to be here. Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm amazing, man. I'm amazing. And happy Saturday as well. Thanks so much for giving up some time on your Saturday.
No
So,
worries at
John,
all.
why don't you start by giving us a bit of a background as to you and what it is you do and where you work?
Sure. So my name is John Alao. I am a final year economics student at the University of Surrey, and I'm a data analyst. So I work in SAP, which is a software company, multinational software company, and we provide business to business solutions. So we provide enterprise software. To put it simply, because not a lot of people know who SAP are, we essentially help companies run their processes better in a more efficient way, help them innovate and become more profitable. So my role as a data analyst involves tasks like, well, obviously data analysis, but predominantly on a website. So we analyze web data and help provide insights to senior business colleagues and help them really understand what's going on and provide them with some insights and some recommendations on what story the data is telling us, and recommendations on what to do with that.
Brilliant, brilliant. And we were just chatting earlier about, how hard it is sometimes to understand what a business does before you get there, what a job description actually means on a day-to-day. So
Yeah.
maybe give us an example of a type of project you might be working on, because that will give us an example product that SAP has and a bit of a better understanding of what data analyst does. So have you got an example you can share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess one of the things, obviously, like you mentioned with job descriptions, it's quite difficult to really get a grasp for what the role actually is. So I've been in my role now for 2 months and I'm still kind of figuring out what exactly is my role entails, all of the different nuances. And even having been in SAP for the past 2 years now, I'm still learning new things about what it is that we actually do as a company. So that's just a little part on that. In terms of an example of some of the things that I do as a data analyst, so I recently started working on a project, which is what we call an internal pilot. So without going into too much detail, we kind of were looking to improve a process. And my role as a data analyst was to look at that process, map it out using a framework, and try and implement some idea on how we're going to track success. So what KPIs are we going to use to measure the success of this pilot program? So as a data analyst, you kind of conceptualize all of these things and you come up with the metrics, you come up with how to measure them, and you come up with the goals. And then you present that to the wider team and we agree upon, the KPIs, and then we go ahead and measure them. So I think that would be a personal example of what I do.
Got it. So, and a small, medium, or large business essentially could go to SAP and say, we want to do this better. And you kind of take that internally, look at the processes, come up with goals, and help them sort of redefine success and kind of come up with efficiencies based on your kind of extensive data knowledge and processing and that sort of thing, right?
Right. I mean, to an extent, that's what SAP does do with its solutions. My role actually is internal. It's internal facing. So I'm actually working with internal teams to kind of figure out exactly how they measure success, predominantly on like SAP's web presence. So I work on the customer community. So we have 21 million unique users, unique visitors per year. So there's a lot of traffic coming in. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of data as well. So we kind of analyze that data and try and figure out what are the trends, what's going on. What are the top topics that people are interested in, and what are the products that people are interested in, and how do we then increase and share the right kind of content to enable our users the best way.
Brilliant. Yeah. And that resonates with me because, we get a lot of traffic here at Diverse as well. So, we have to be on it with our conversion as well. So let's then, before we get into the application story then, and that process that you went through, what is it that you think kind of SAP looks for, in a graduate or a summer analyst? Are there any kind of key values or traits that you've noticed that are kind of commonplace or that you showed well during the process before we get into the nuts and bolts?
Yeah, I think so So when I applied for my internship, I think I did seek feedback, and one of the key things that I heard from the recruiters and the people hiring was my proactive nature, my ability to kind of listen to what's going on in the assessment center, and then provide my input without just kind of jumping into it. I don't think they're looking for a polished gem. They're not looking for a finished product. They're looking for someone who's enthusiastic about learning, and I think that's probably one of the best skills you can have, being genuinely curious, enthusiastic about learning, because at our age no one really knows all that much about any specific company or any specific industry. So it's just a case of being really ready to learn and eager to get stuck in.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, isn't there, with sort of applying for early career roles, because let's be honest, like as a student, you don't really know what you want to do for the next 5 years, which is totally fine. It's hard to understand what a business does. It's hard to understand what different roles mean. So you're kind of just winging it a little bit. And employers appreciate that. And they just think to themselves, look, in 4, 5, 6 months, we can train them on the key elements of this role. So we don't need them to come here and know exactly how to analyze all our data on day one. So that's absolutely not what they're looking for. What they do want is someone, as you said, who's proactive, willing to learn, because they're teachable, right? If you don't have that, then it's a little bit of a worry for the employer, because where do you go from there? So yeah, and that's quite encouraging, because almost anyone really should be able to do that in the application process. Kind of be proactive in doing your research, and then when you get there, seem really eager and willing to learn and asking questions and that sort of thing. So let's dive into the application story then. How did that go? What were the steps, and how did you do well?
Yeah. So application story for my internship. So this was 2019, 2018. So towards the end of 2018, so end of second year. So I was applying for industrial placements. That was part of my degree. And I think as an economics student, I was kind of looking at what my options were. And I think this is probably one of the first misconceptions a lot of people have. You have the option to go, anywhere you want, not depending on what degree you do. I'm an economics student, and I, went into tech. And I think a lot of people have the misconception that to go into tech, you have to study maths, or you have to study computer science, but that's simply not the case. So I really tried to diversify where I was applying to. I ended up applying to SAP with no idea of who SAP were. I did some research, and I was still scratching my head, because obviously they're business to business. So not a lot of people actually see SAP like you would Microsoft, for example. So I applied to SAP. The initial process was submit a CV and a cover letter. I actually forgot to submit my cover letter, but I did get an email asking me to submit that. It's a funny story, actually. I was actually on my way to Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi, and I got the email, and I was thinking to myself, should I go to Ferrari World, or should I submit this? I'll just submit the cover letter. So I did that, and I ended up, obviously I'm here now, so it ended up being a pretty good move. But so after I submitted the CV and cover letter, I had a telephone interview. So that interview was kind of just competency-based questions, without, again, going too much into the process. But it was kind of just, a get to know you kind of interview before coming to the assessment center, which was around, February time the next year. So then assessment center happened. That was a full day event in the office, which was, really good. I know for people who are applying this year, they probably wouldn't get the same kind of experience simply because of COVID. But yeah, it was really good to kind of meet new people, interact with people within the company, and kind of just see what everything's all about. So that was successful, and then I ended up getting the role.
Love that. And I think good decision to make that application.
Yeah.
But I guess look at you, right, for them hitting you up to say, guess what, you need to put your cover letter in.
Yeah,
maybe they saw your CV and they thought, we don't want to let this guy go, so they give you a bit of a chance there. But let's take those piece by piece then, and get some of your top tips on each of those. We've got a lot of students, especially, that listen from around the world now, which is pretty cool. So what would be your advice for how to put together a great CV? Is there anything that you've done that you think really stands out to make a difference?
I think, in all honesty, my CVs in the past have been absolutely terrible. One thing I have done is seek feedback. And I have probably on my desktop about 100 different CVs that have just been iterated again and again and again. So I've sought feedback from people who have been successful in getting placements or been successful in getting grad jobs, asked them to take a look at my CV and, really taking their feedback on board. It's one of those things where different people will give you different feedback, and it's up to you to kind of decipher and, come up with what's right for you. But definitely, number one is seek feedback from people who know what they're doing. I think that's the best way you learn from others. So yeah, I'd also say my personal preference is to keep it to one page. I am alongside that school of thought that's like, if you're in university, you don't need a 2-page CV. So that's my personal opinion. Other people might say other things. So yeah, I think those two things on CV is probably my 2 tips.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. I've got a bit of a pet peeve when it comes to multiple pages of CVs. There are some nuances, some engineering kind of sectors prefer a 2-page CV apparently, but for me, it's 1 page, because what people fail to understand is that employers and recruiters pick up your CV, they scan it for 4 seconds, and they can immediately tell if you've got a chance of being good for the role. And I always thought that was probably a bit exaggerated until over the past sort of year or so, I've been reviewing CVs, and I absolutely can do that in a few seconds because I've spent ages working on the role. So I know what the benchmark is with other candidates, and I know kind of just skimming through your CV, the skill I should know, what your experience is, what you've accomplished, what your key skills are.
Exactly.
So yeah, give me a 1-page CV as well, please. And the dichotomy here is that the more information you put on a CV, the harder it is for me to determine what really stands out and what is actually going to move the needle to get you the job. You know what I mean? Like, there's only ever a couple of things, especially when you're early on in your career, that's really going to get you the job, right? So make sure you put emphasis on those things and not throw in a load of waffle.
I think just on that point, actually, Toby, one last point that I have on that is one thing that's really, really useful is scanning the job description. So you can scan a job description for keywords. They may talk about a key skill that you need, for example, SQL, if you're a data analyst. And if you don't have that keyword in your CV, then the chances are, if they use, for example, some automatic scanning software, you need to make sure that you talk about those keywords. Also, when you talk about your achievements, make sure they're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like action-based. So I achieved this through doing this, and kind of give examples of exactly what you've done and what the impact was of those actions, what your role was in a task, how you went about it, and what the impact was for, your company, your boss, or your team at university, group work, and just be a bit more descriptive rather than just say, I achieved this. Be a bit more descriptive.
Yeah, I love that. And I often see, in the bullet points of the CV, it will say, I demonstrated this, or just jump straight in, demonstrated X, achieved, this, successfully completed. So it's action orientated, each word.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, there's also a website called Job Scan, where you can actually upload your CV and the job description, and it'll scan the two together, and it basically does what the applicant tracking software does for the employers. So they can kind of scan that and see how well it aligns to the job. And to your point, you need to make sure you include some of those keywords in your CV, because that's what these machines and also recruiters are going to be looking for. And also your first point as well, get advice from your career center, your employability center at university. On our website, we've got example CVs as well. If you go to wearediverse.io, you can sign up and get free CV examples that have actually been successful. So yeah, that's a good idea. Or just get your friends or family to look at it, right? So I always got my brother to review mine. So yeah, okay. And then next step, we went on over to a competency-based phone interview. So any tips on that? How do you do well in a phone interview, do you think?
Yeah, so I think preparation is key. This was kind of the first point of contact where you're kind of face to face, if you like. So it's immediate pressure. You're not, having months to go over your CV, your cover letter. This is a kind of face to face interaction. So preparation is so important. For my phone interview, I prepared by researching the company in depth, researching their products, researching what's coming on the horizon for the company, what they're focused on, what are their goals, what are their like key, what behaviors do they look for, all of these kind of things, what's their culture. So doing your research is invaluable, and it'll help you come across as someone who's both interested in the role, interested in the company, and focused and determined. So yeah, my key tip there is, doing your research, your due diligence. Secondly, I would say practice as well. So with competency-based questions, you can go online, you can find question banks. So I think I'm not 100% sure on the resource. I'll follow up with you on that one. Maybe you can put it in the description.
Yeah.
There are resources out there that you can see a bunch of competency-based questions and just practice them with a friend, practice them with your uni friends or your siblings or whatever. And it will really help you get a grasp for the question. And obviously using the STAR technique, so situation, task, action, result, which is really useful. And the more you practice it, the more kind of natural it will become, rather than saying the situation was, the task was, the action was, the result was. You learn to weave it into a kind of story so that the interviewer, they noticed you're hitting all of these points because they will have that in front of them. They'll have, is this person talking about the STAR technique? So they'll have it in front of them and they'll hear every point you're saying, but it won't necessarily be like a robot just listing off stuff. So the more you practice, the better you'll get. And, you will hear questions come up that you've practiced before. In terms of the examples that you use, you can pick examples from like anywhere. You can pick examples from uni work. You can pick examples from a part-time job you had when you were 16. You can pick examples from any internships you might have done. So I think I used predominantly university examples because at that point I hadn't had any internships. But I did also use some like things that I did outside of uni and school and stuff like that. So I actively helped like manage properties. So that's something that's like, I guess you could call it a passion project. So I kind of mentioned what skills I learned from that and how I dealt with certain situations, which I think definitely stands out. So if you have anything outside of the traditional university or school side of things, definitely pick on that, whether it's sport, whether it's music, anything. If you run a business, like use it. And there's always going to be something that you've learned from these different things that you can apply to a competency-based question. So being unique about it is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. And the world is really changing. And I think there's going to be a bigger and bigger emphasis on these kind of alternative ways of getting experience through side hustles and businesses and
definitely.
Property. And is that not, going back to your earlier point about kind of the willingness to learn and being proactive, is that not even more impressive than kind of getting a summer internship? If I was looking to hire someone, I would value it more personally.
Yeah, definitely.
And just out of interest is on that, because you strike me as a person who probably would have a lot of internships. I don't know why. You just strike me as someone who would do well in those applications and want to get lots of internships. Is there a reason why you didn't do that and you kind of wanted to focus more on property, or was it just the fact that you wanted to focus more on your degree, or what do you think it was?
Yeah, so I mean, my kind of background, so for A levels, I studied chemistry, biology, physics, and economics, and I wanted to study medicine. That didn't end up happening. I ended up studying economics. So for first year and the most of second year, I was still trying to, rack my mind and rack my brain as to what it is I wanted to do. So a lot of the internships that people come into first year and they're ready and I'm going to do Goldman Sachs, I'm going to do JP Morgan, I'm going to do all of these different companies, but I wasn't really too sure of what it is that I wanted to do. So I think I probably missed the train a little bit. So in terms of internships, the experience I had was like insight days, and that was probably the extent of it. So I think that's probably why I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I think that's absolutely fine. For people listening, you might be in second year and you might still not know what you want to do, but that's fine because, there is time.
100%. Yeah, look at what John's done, right? Like for the people who not got a summer internship or a placement, you can definitely still get roles at these great companies, and there will be opportunities out there for you as long as you listen to the podcast and take on
exactly,
the advice.
And subscribe and like.
Exactly. Yeah. Listen to the advice John's given. Like come up with your examples. Competency-based phone interview. Have 3 or 4 examples that you can pull from. I think sometimes people overthink this, but if you only have limited experience anyway, right? So there's only going to be a few things that if I ask you, tell me about a time when you've shown excellent teamwork and skills. There are only a few really good examples you can use in an interview. So going in, write down, 3 or 4 different things. A university project, maybe a side hustle, maybe volunteering, maybe an internship, and you pull all of your answers from there because if you've got to this stage, if you got to the interview, chances are you've got the skills that they're looking for. So now it's just about pulling out those skills in the experience that you have and showing them that you can explain where you've got those skills and how you can apply them to this role. And you also mentioned research. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, alongside that, it's absolutely fine to ask them to take a moment to think. So I actually did. So they pulled out a competency-based question that I wasn't really sure what I could fit it to. So I said, can I have a minute just to think about this? And that's a lot better than rushing into it and using a situation that just doesn't fit. So take your time. The pressure, you can control the pressure to an extent. You can ask them, can I take a moment to think about that? And they're not going to say no. So
yeah, no, that's so underrated. And even just not even asking, like literally, I give you a question and you take a moment and you just think, and then you dive in. Like even that is perfectly fine. Like it surprises me. Yeah, people just dive in, they waffle for a bit, and then they leave the answer short. Whereas if you pause, and I like to give myself a bit of structure, so I'll probably think of like 3 points, let's say. Tell me about a time when I'll come up with the STAR technique and maybe a couple more points after that. And I'll pause first. And then I know that gives me structure, so I'm not going to waffle and I'm going to stick to those 3 points because I've had a chance to have a think about it. You also mentioned research as well. So looking at, I like what you said there about looking at the company culture, their products, what they do, their sort of place in the market. Because a lot of times I think people do research and they'll find loads of crazy stats, that they're never actually gonna, use, or the interviewer doesn't even know that stuff. But it's real world things. It's like, what is SAP doing in the news right now? Literally just Googling SAP and then clicking the news tab on Google. And yeah, diving into their products and their services. If it's B2B, you're not going to be able to, get your hands on the products or anything like that, but you can at least, read up on it and learn about it. And then, practice, you said as well, practice out loud and getting comfortable given your point so you don't sound too robotic when it comes to the interview. I like that a lot. So, and then we got through to, well, congratulations, we got through to the assessment center now. That's good. What was that like then? So I'm guessing we have to do a presentation, group exercise, maybe individual task. Any tips for any of those stages?
So in general, assessment centers usually consist of like an icebreaker to start with. And don't be fooled, it may seem a bit informal, but people probably are watching. They're not actively assessing you, but it probably will form part of their opinion. So I think it's important to be ready, at the very beginning. As soon as you walk through those doors, kind of, be confident in yourself, try and say hi to at least one person, and, get talking to one person. So the very first thing I did, I saw someone outside. I greeted him, I said hi. We ended up actually working together. We work together now, so funny story. But greet people, say hi, and just it will help you kind of become more confident and calm because you now know some of these faces, get to know someone's name, just have a little chat with them. So we had an icebreaker to start with. I think just simply talk to people. And if you see anyone from the company, try to talk to them as well, because that will leave a positive impression, because a lot of people in the assessment center will be shy. People might appear confident, but everyone's a little bit nervous. So if you go and approach someone from the company and say, hi, how are you? I'm so-and-so, I'm here for the assessment center, nice office, nice weather, whatever you like. It will also help calm your nerves. So that's probably the first stage of most assessment centers, icebreaker. You'll have like the introduction, they'll talk you through what's going on. So then assessment centers usually have like group tasks, I guess. So with group tasks, there are so many different conflicting ideas of what's the best approach to take, what role you should take in the group work. But I think the most important thing, sorry.
No, we've got suspense there. I like that. The most important thing. I was waiting.
The most important thing is to play to your strengths. I would be wrong to tell you that the best thing to do is to take the lead or to be the timekeeper or to be the ideas guy. You have to play to your strengths. If you're someone who's naturally a leader, find a way to lead. It may be leading from the front. It may also be being, a little bit more reserved, but being quietly the boss kind of thing. So when I was in my assessment center, I see myself as naturally someone who likes to lead, but I realized that there were also personalities there who were the same as me. So rather than conflicting with them and trying to compete for the lead, I sat back and listened. And I waited and I listened. And then when I saw the opportunity to say something, I would then speak. And I think part of the feedback that I got was they realized that, again, there were personalities there and there was a possibility for them to clash. But because I sat back and listened and really tried to understand what was going on, I could then provide some useful additions to the conversation and actually steer the conversation and the task in the direction that it should have gone. So I think that's definitely something to look out for. If you're a natural born leader, definitely try and think about how you come across, because it's very easy to get caught up and start competing because, you're trying to get a job, right? So it is a competitive situation, but you have to kind of think beyond that and try and figure out how you're coming across as well. Body language is also important.
And just on that,
so
John, did you have any concern, that when you were taking a bit of a step back and not being too loud, that you might sort of be lost in that you didn't say enough, or did that ever cross your mind?
Right.
Were you ever worried about that?
It did. It definitely did. It's one of those things that you have to trust the process, I guess. So I trusted in my ability to kind of listen and eventually come up with something useful, rather than just getting stuck in and saying the first thing that came to my mind. So I guess it's just, again, having faith in your ability to come up with something and steer the conversation in the right way and really critically evaluate what's going on. And the tasks, they're not always that easy. You really do have to think about them. So it does pay dividends to sit back and kind of have a little bit of a think. But again, that's just my strength. For someone else, their strength might be organization. So they might be the person who says, I'll be the timekeeper, because they're going to be organized. So yeah, I think overall play to your strengths are so important.
Yeah, I'm glad you've done that, because sometimes it's not easy always to give advice on these things because you don't know exactly who's listening. So you don't want to have a blanket statement of this is how you do it. Usually there's a blanket statement of this is how you not to do it. So don't go and stand on everyone's toes, be too domineering and all that. That's the way to lose an assessment center, because as you've said, you collaborate and you kind of make friends really, and you end up working together. Because you're not all competing in an assessment center, often you're not all even going for the same job, right? So you've got to work together and collaborate.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because exactly that. In my assessment center, we were all actually going for the same role. So they were looking for people who were team players. They weren't necessarily looking for people who were, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then someone to take the credit. So that's definitely important. Realize that this is all about working in a team. That's why it's called a group session or a group work project or whatever. It's all about how do you communicate with people? How do you work with other people, I guess.
Brilliant. Oh, losing my voice now. Good stuff. So you're about to go into body language. Any top tips there?
Again, it's one of those things. I think research is going to help you a lot. So I did actually do some research on body language and how to kind of portray yourself in a certain way. So like open palms, speaking to the room. So the assessors might be on one end of the room and the group might be on the other end of the room. So, I mean, if you wanted to be tactical, position yourself in a way that your body's facing both the assessors and the team so they can see what's going on, rather than perhaps having your back to the assessors because they're not going to see how you're communicating. So that's one thing I did tactically. But in terms of group work as a whole, it's really important to research as well. So do research on what the different types of roles could be in group work. So, you have your leader, you have your timekeeper, you have the person who's going to present at the end, all of these different roles, and try and figure out, what suits you the best. Have your number one, number two, number three, and try and figure out how you would behave in each of those type of situations. Uni group work is a really good kind of introduction to that assessment center kind of thing, because uni group work is not easy, and you will learn how to communicate with people, how to resolve problems, how to get ideas and all that kind of stuff. So definitely draw on that experience, because it is a lot more useful than I thought it was. So
interesting, yeah. And you mentioned the open palms there as well, and like using your hands and that kind of thing. Do you remember why that is? Why that works? I'm a bit of psychology always interests me, so I'm always keen to learn about it.
No, I'm not 100% sure. There probably is some psychological reason why it is, but it's almost like if you talk to someone and you point, it's authoritative. If your hands are pointing down, again, authoritative. But if your hands are open, it shows you're more accepting, you're being honest, trustworthy, all that kind of stuff. So I guess that all plays into it. It's probably not, you don't have to go that deep to understand it, but just try and make sure that you're not kind of arms crossed. That's probably one thing I'd say don't do, because it shows that, you're closed off, or you're not collaborative. So kind of just have an open posture and just try and be comfortable. Body language is kind of something that you can look into a little bit down the line, but I think definitely the things I mentioned before are really tips that I would advise people to look into.
Good stuff. And then on top of that, we've got to do an individual task. Those are always quite hard to touch on because they're so kind of bespoke to the organization, the situation. You've just kind of got to take your time and have attention to detail. Look at all they kind of have little nuggets in there, don't they? Little Easter eggs, and then watch you pick those up. And I think it is hard to know or prepare for those. Fundamentally, I think it's really good to know the company's values, be really clear on the values, so that when you give your answer, you can base it on that. So I don't know, SAP really values communication with a client above all else. Let's just say hypothetically, and then so based on that, if you look at a task, you might tailor your answer to that and say, let's be really proactive and upfront, and reveal this to our client, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I think that's good. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that. If not, presentations, I imagine you've got some good tips on that as well.
I guess for individual tasks, there's going to be the biggest variety. So out of all the parts of the assessment center, the individual tasks will probably vary the most. So depending on what type of company you're applying to, if it's consulting, if it's in tech, if it's in, all of these different industries, they have their different types of individual tasks. So it's one of those things that I think it's just a case of doing your best. And if you're struggling with something, it might be the situation where you could just ask, I'm not quite sure what this means. But just generally do your best. I think that's probably more specific to each company. So maybe even reach out to someone who's, done that process before and say, could you give me any tips on the individual task? And hopefully they'll, give you some tips. But
Brilliant. No, definitely find someone who's done it already if you can.
100%.
Get those inside
100%.
tips. And then how about the presentation then? A lot of people are very nervous presenting, and that's kind of the most scary aspect of it. Did you feel that as well? Did you get nervy doing
100%. I get so nervous. I think it's one of those things. I've presented a lot over the past few years, but every time I present, I do have a bit of adrenaline, a little bit of nerves, but I think that's completely natural. And I learned to reframe it, to kind of reframe, your heart's beating like this, and reframe it as excitement. So that's probably the best tip I've ever had when it comes to, presenting, especially when you've done your group project, you have to present it. So you're nervous, you feel the butterflies in your stomach, your heart's pounding, but reframe it as excitement and be enthusiastic. And it definitely helps because, your voice might be a little bit shaky to start off with. But when you start to kind of get into it, you'll become a little bit more confident. In terms of tips on presentations, I think try and make sure you're projecting your voice. Try and make sure you're looking around the room because there are going to be multiple people there. So try and look around the room to different people whilst you're speaking. And I think for some assessment centers, they will ask questions after the presentation as well. So try and pre-prepare, try and think about what is it about this presentation that I would like to ask a question about, and try and kind of think through those answers. And if they ask you a question that you don't know, simply just say, you know what, I'm not 100% sure, but I'll follow back up with you afterwards.
There you go.
That's one of those things that you'll learn in business. But yeah, it's top 2 tips would probably be try and project your voice, reframe your anxiety, your nerves as excitement, and try and look around the room and make eye contact with different people to show that you're engaging yourself.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because you strike me as you're a cool guy, and I can imagine you've been very cool, calm, collected in the presentation. But if you're getting nervous, then it's fine for everyone to feel that as well, right? So I'm glad you shared that.
You should be worried if you're not getting nervous before a presentation, because it means, one, you don't care. If you're not nervous before a presentation, you probably are not too bothered. But nerves are good. It helps you perform better. So
yeah. Or you're just a psychopath. So, I mean, I guess that's either one of those. So, well, congrats on getting SAP then. So, obviously, you've been successful throughout that CV, phone interview, assessment center as well. So, obviously, you smashed that one out of the park. And you've got a great role now in data analyst, which you're in a great spot as well with the growth in tech and being at such a big company and a big brand. That is the advantageous part of that, isn't it? Once you do that, you can kind of move wherever you want within tech from here on in. So I'm sure you've got a very bright future. Let's now, I guess, talk a little bit about rejection, because to get there, to get to the success, often it's a challenging road, and that's how we learn. And a lot of the people I talk to, they're going for roles at very difficult companies. So, these big organizations, or even not even just the big organizations, they're hard and competitive to get jobs at. So there might be thousands of applications for one role. And I think people go through a lot of these rejections and they feel that they're kind of not good enough, which it's just not quite right based on the statistics of literally who's applying, and you've kind of just got to keep going until you get your role. But talk to me a little bit about the journey you got to get there, and who knows, maybe that was your first application, it was one and done. But what was your perspective on rejection through that road?
Yeah, so I think rejection is one of those things. We live in a social media age where we see the highlights of everyone's life, and I think we're all to some extent a bit guilty, and it's up to us to kind of let people know that we're all just human and we all go through rejection. We all take L's, if you like. So I've taken a lot of L's in applications. My viewpoint has always been quality over quantity. So it's never been a case where I applied to 300 places and I got one. I was always focused on making sure that each application was an application that I was fairly confident that I would get somewhere with. So I would spend a decent amount of time researching, and it is really it's difficult to put in those hours, but it's so important, because the quality over quantity principle and a bit of patience as well will definitely take you a long way, I think. If you know what kind of industry it is that you want to work in, target that industry and tailor your CV to the companies that you're applying to, tailor your cover letter. And what I mean by tailor is, you have your template, but obviously you're speaking in a different type of way. You're talking about different specifics. You have different keywords, different trigger words. And that will really help, show that you're actually interested in that role. So that's probably the first thing I'd say. In terms of rejections, it's something that happens to all of us. I think there are very, very few people that get every single job they apply for. And if they tell you that, they're probably lying, simply because part of the application process is a little bit of luck. So is that recruiter in the right mind frame at the right time? Are they in a good mood? Are they going to, put your CV in the accept pile? So there is a little aspect of luck to it. And that's where the numbers do come in, because if you have only one application and you're just unlucky, you don't have a job. But if you have 10, 15, 20 good quality applications, the chances are, the law of large numbers, you're going to get something. So numbers are definitely important. So sometimes you'll get rejected from a company that you are really, really passionate about. You really wanted the role, and you kind of just have to take it on the chin, take the feedback that they give you. And, it's not it's not personal, if we put it that way. It's not that, they don't think I'm good enough for the role. You might have been good enough for the role. But like, we know that this year, especially, competition's been so high. So there is a lot of people in a situation where they've made a lot of applications, good quality applications, but they just haven't had the results that they want. But that doesn't mean that you should stop doing applications. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It's just the situation this year is really, really competitive. And, someone might end up getting the role who's not as good as you in the role. It's difficult because you have to try and signal and let the recruiter know, I'm the great person in one page on a CV and a short cover letter. So it's very difficult to kind of get through all of these different hoops and hurdles. And, you're going to stumble at some points. But I think advice that people have given in the past, like, just keep going. And, have faith in yourself, in your ability. You're a good candidate. So eventually you're going to get something, that's worth your while and that you want.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, you touched on a really important point, which is it's not always the very best person who gets the job. There's luck involved, there's human elements. So you kind of just can't take it personally. It's hard to say, but that is the reality of it, isn't it? And you can never really compare yourself to others. And I think that's the detrimental side of social media sometimes. It's like people post their highlights, there's that phrase, like, you compare your highlights, someone else's highlights to your lowlights, because you're around for the highs and lows, but you only see their, oh, I got a job at SAP. But part of what we want to do in this podcast is kind of demystify some of that and talk about the rejection. You've got a great role, but you've gone through that like everyone else as well. So I'm really glad that you shared that. Let's I guess to wrap up, we've got a lot of employers now that also want to listen to better understand candidates and young professionals and what you're going through this year. Finally, diversity and inclusion is a topic that employers are really focused on and want to get right. So, I mean, I'd love to ask you your perspective on that, and take it anywhere you want to go. When we talk about diversity in terms of careers and work, that you can kind of split it up into two buckets. There's the attraction. So some employers don't sort of resonate well with a diverse Gen Z audience. Others might attract those people, but might not create an inclusive and welcoming environment when they get there. So either one of those, any advice from your perspective on employers, or it could be something you've seen employers do really well from your experience. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I'll probably touch on two or three things here. So firstly, it's probably, what we like to see from employers. So for me, I'm quite an analytical person, and the key thing is understanding what's going on in your organization. So do they actually know what diversity and inclusion is like within their organization? So have they done, employee surveys for BAME employees and understanding, how they operate within the organization, how they feel, do they feel like they're listened to? So I think transparency as well, being able to publish results and say, okay, we have, X percentage of BAME in the workforce at these different levels within the career, so that people like me, people who are applying, people who are watching these videos can see, okay, this employer is at this stage, they have a commitment to improve and get to this stage, so they have goals in place. So it's not just a case of we realize that, inclusion and diversity is not great here, but what are we actively doing about it? And I've seen really, really good things from companies over the past few months, actively setting goals, and it's really encouraging. And big companies as well, but you think they're actually doing something about it, and they're focused on improving these metrics, if you like. I think another thing alongside, attracting diverse talent, I think attracting diverse talent is one part of it, but you have to look at retention as well. So, you may be able to attract diverse talent by great marketing, talking about all of your goals, etc. But actually putting in the work and, retaining employees is a whole nother story, and it requires, investment as well. So I think those are two things that those are two questions I would ask if I were interviewing, or if I was looking at a prospective company. Those are things that I would want to know. probably talk to current employees and ask them like around those two things. And the general trend you'll see is that companies realize that they're not where they want to be. And it's just a case of, do they realize, we need to put these goals in place and actually achieve them and get to somewhere so that we can both attract diverse talent and retain it. There's been a lot of studies that show having diverse talent in your organization is highly beneficial if your organization reflects like your clients as well. So if you have a multinational company, they have clients all over the world, but if your team who's interacting with your clients is, not diverse and is not reflective of the wider population, you're not going to do as well as a team who is diverse, because it's just that diversity of thought, that diversity of experience, mindset, etc. So I think the incentives are definitely there for companies. It's just a case of kind of working through all of the kind of things that I just mentioned in order to get to the end goal. In terms of diversity in tech, I think the last time I checked the figures, we're looking at roughly 1 to 2% BAME in tech. And I think the advice I'd give to anyone listening who's like me, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, etc., is don't be discouraged by the stats. There are definitely some really good organizations that are helping, for example, like the organization and, companies like Rare Recruitment, SEO London, Bright Network. So they have, really good things in place to help make the process a little bit more accessible to people from, I guess, non-traditional backgrounds, and try and lower that barrier to entry. So I think definitely make use of that, but don't necessarily think that because I come from a certain background, entering tech is not for me. Definitely is, and I would definitely encourage you to look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is for you, and I couldn't have said any of that any better myself. You've shown and you've reiterated that, Gen Z especially, you're very just as a cohort of people, very socially conscious and focused on diversity, well-being, mental health, social impact as well. So what is the employer actually doing to make the world a better place? Right. All these things factor into your decision making. So if as employers you're not kind of living up to expectations on any of those things, then you're going to miss out on top talent, because they're not going to want to work at your organization. And to your Absolutely. Point, super clear, no one needs this explaining. Diverse teams are more efficient, more productive teams. So, that's going to impact the bottom line of your organization. And that's what actually gives me confidence that we have already seen a wave of change, and it's going to be ongoing, because employers are going to understand, if nothing else, we want our teams to be as good as possible. And in order to do that, we might have historically only been hiring from, Russell Group universities or, these backgrounds in particular, but we're going to widen that now because we see the benefits. So that change is certainly 100%. Happening now, and it's going to be happening more so in the future, which is fantastic. So yeah, let's wrap it up there. This has been brilliant. I think you've dropped some really, really good advice, and I think people have really learned from what you said today, John. So I really appreciate that. We're going to be here basically every week, so do hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Google, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the Diverse podcast. If you're an employer, you can kind of we can help you attract a more diverse talent pool by heading over to wearediverse.io. Same if you're looking for a job role as well. We've got tons of free resources and opportunities. But yeah, thanks so much, John, and congrats with the role you've landed. All the best with your studies for the rest of the year.
Thank you very much.
And your career at SAP.